Warning, sunglasses are required.
Warning, BFG 10,000 is firing.
Discharge. In 3.12, DMG decided to completely rework the discharge skill. It now has a 2-second cooldown and much higher added damage effectiveness, and most importantly, it now does way more damage per charge than it did before. So, how can we use this new patch to our advantage? Well, now that Discharge has a much higher base damage per charge, but has a 2-second cooldown, our main goal now becomes to one-shot bosses. Reason being is because we don't want to sit like ducks when our Discharge is on cooldown. With this, the first thing that comes to mind is using the second wind support gem, giving Discharge a lower cooldown and 2 charges, allowing you to effectively double tap a boss if you have enough damage. But even while stacking a bunch of critical strike multiplier and critical strike chance, how effectively can you actually double top Guardians and Shaper? How often can you actually not sit like a duck when your Discharge is on cooldown? What if I said you can one-shot bosses? What if I said the correct choice was ailments? Or you see, if you really think about it, if you're playing a critical strike version of Discharge, you have to use second wind as one of your support gems. But if you're playing Ignite and you can one-shot a boss, what is there a need for a second charge? You can effectively then remove second wind from your 6-link and add a 6-link damage, effectively giving us even more damage than a so-called critical strike build. So how can we abuse this? Well, we know that to ignite we need a lot of fire damage, and we know Discharge gets fire damage per endurance charge. How can we get endurance charges? We can easily do this with Endurance Cry, but I'm not going to Endurance Cry in every single pack of mobs that I'm going to encounter. So with this, the best way to do this obviously would be using a Vol's Devotion. Vol's Devotion dictates that when we expend or lose a power charge, we gain an endurance charge. So the question is, how do we get power charges? It's actually incredibly easy. If we use the Pharaoh's First chest piece and Aspect of the Cat, every time that we gain cat stuff, we gain our maximum amount of power charges and frenzy charges. To further abuse this, we can craft Aspect of the Cat in any piece of gear. In this case, we use our helmets and link 2 gems to it, Swift Affliction and Less Duration, both reducing the duration of the buff, allowing us to switch to cat stuff much sooner than regular, allowing us to get our maximum power charges and frenzy charges much more often. But Koga, if we use power charges and frenzy charges, it gives our Discharge cold and lightning damage, and that can't ignite, so why even bother using it? It's a very expensive chest piece. Well, you see, it has incredible value. If we use the Stormfire Opal Ring, now our lightning damage can ignite. And if we use the Himburn Gloves, now our cold damage can ignite. And if you didn't know, our ignite is based off our base damage, not our increased damage or more damage from the tree. Meaning, now with triple elemental ignites, the more charges we get, the more and the higher the base damage of the ignite will be, and the higher it will scale with all the increased and more damage on the tree. So thus, at this point, all we have to do is just stack a lot of charges. How can we do that? Easy. Our character naturally gains 3 power charges, 3 endurance charges, and 3 frenzy charges, giving 9 total charges. By using the new base, the Eventuality Rod, we get +1 to our maximum power charges and maximum endurance charges, thus giving us 11 charges. By using the Swift Killer Ascendancy from Trickster, we gain +1 maximum frenzy charges and +1 maximum power charges. So now we're at 13 charges. And then we get a frenzy charge here, a power charge here, another power charge here, and another endurance charge here. And another power charge here as well. Using the Intuitive Leap allows us to skip all those nodes and grab them very efficiently, giving us a total of 19 charges. But we're not done there. After volleying 36 Himburn Gloves, I managed to cop a +1 frenzy charge Corruption, and it was the only one on the market, so good luck finding another one. And with this, we're sitting at 20 charges, giving us a lot of damage. Look at them, all them sexy charges, bro. Look at, oh yeah. But we're not done. If there's one line you may have forgotten to read, Discharge says 20% increased area of effect per charge consumed. What does that mean when you have 20 charges? That's 400% increased AOE. Insert maniacal laughter. But you fool! That's not even my full power. Well, you see, you have just activated my trap card, the +5 radius helmet enchant. If you didn't know, this is different than your scaling area of effect. This increases our base AOE, which is then scaled even higher by a 400% increased area of effect. Insert even more maniacal laughter. But wait, there's even more. You've just activated my second trap card, Ignite Proliferation. So you think we have 77 units of AOE? Think again, using Ignite Proliferation or Ignites spread out for another 20 units. So our AOE effectively is actually 97. So now it's officially time to go over all the criteria for a good build. Criteria number 1, clear speed. Criteria number 2, defenses. Well, actually, you just blow your load and run the fuck away. Oh my lord. Those deeps, dude. Look at the fucking deeps. And criteria number 3, the damage. Out of here. Both of them dead. Both of them are gonna die right now. Look at them, they're both dead. They're both dead. One shot. Easy last phase, dude. Just blow them up. They have no more phases. They just melt. I'm done. Here we go, here we go. Yeah, what you want to raise from me? Where's this bitch at, bro? There we go. There it is. Oh my. I didn't know he could die in that phase. Whatever, dude. Fuck that shit. Now, before we move on, if you guys have enjoyed what you've seen so far, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it helps me out immensely with the YouTube algorithm. On top of that, if you guys want to see how these builds are made from the ground up, please consider following me over at twitch.tv/Kogadas in the link down below. If you guys want to see these builds usually made over a 3-day time period, because I only stream every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. On top of that, if you guys have any questions, the best place for that is the Discord community link down below. And that's, you know, the best place for me to answer because I have the most time and I can answer from my phone much quicker. Also, there's other community members out there that, you know, I'm much more likely to help you if I'm not available at the time. But if you guys can wait, then the 2 comments down below are perfect and I'll do my best to answer all of them for you. And with that, guys, let's move on to the build guide. Now, welcome back to the build guide. The character's called Sunglasses Required for obvious reasons. Cue the explosion. So freaking good. If I had to give it a word, it'd be orgasmic. If you have this lesson MTX, and wait, 20 charge. Boom. That's the actual 20 charge MTX with 400% increase AOE. Absolutely glorious. Right? So, main reason why the build's so amazing, we don't have to use concentrated effect. So our AOE is always that massive no matter who the hell we're fighting. And the reason being is because concentrated effect does not add any damage to the ignite. Okay, JK, obviously not just that, but we are a trickster. Mainly reason because it gives us a lot of damage over time and the extra frenzy charges and lightning and power charges. But overall, the gist of the build is basically getting as many charges as possible of every single type, because fire damage from the endurance charges naturally ignites. But when you use a storm fire, now the power charges give you lightning damage will also ignite, and him burns will make the frenzy charges that give you cold damage also ignite. And that gives Discharge a lot of base damage, and that's what the Ignite's based off of. So now that you have all three elements affecting basically can ignite, now the base damage of the Ignite and what scales off with all the increase of more multipliers is based off all that damage you see on the screen right there, and you just multiply it by the number of charges. I'm not doing that math, you can go do that yourself, right? And yes, I know it says 30% less damage of elements, but that's basically just to keep the build from being like stupidly overpowered. Because right now our DPS is around 5 million DPS per Ignite, and the big number, the 29 million per Ignite, is basically the Ignite over its duration. If you guys see here, my Ignite duration is around 5.89 seconds. So over that duration, when you ignite them with your maximum amount of damage, the bigger the AOE, the more charges, so the bigger the Ignite, right? That will do around 29 million to, roughly 30 million, depending on, high and low stuff. But so that technically can one-shot most bosses in the game. That will one-shot most bosses in the game, including Uber Elder. You'll see some, as you guys saw, like Uber Elder, the portals just got absolutely shredded. Elder, I can just stand in the middle and not give a flying a doodle about anything. Just blow up all the freaking portals. He's like a boss right in the middle. I'm sorry, I love this build. This build turned out to be absolutely amazing. The reason why I'm so excited about it, because I was only Archmage before, and that means I had to wait to level 80 to get Stormfire so that I can ignite. And that felt freaking terrible, because I was just walking to people, Endure and Cry, pop, Endure and Cry, pop, until level, basically, Pharaoh's Fur and Stormfire. It felt so bad, I had to let my chat, my stream carry me. It was just so god-awful. But now, with the Hidden Gloves, you can use them at level 24, so you can actually ignite using Freezing Pulse when you're leveling. I'll go over the leveling later on. And I made the build so much more fun and easier to do while leveling, until you get all this stuff going. So I would recommend, to use Freezing Pulse all the way until you get your Pharaoh's Fur, and then use Discharge. You get Discharge in Act 2 when you do the Library quest, and at that point in time, you basically don't want to use it. Just put it in your other socket and just level it up. That's all you want to do with that until you get your Pharaoh's Fur, right? So that's the gist of it. And you get all the charges on the tree. Over here you get Intuitive Leap, you get all the charges, you get more charges over here. We anoint another charge over here. It's actually like dirt cheap. It's like a silver, black, and orange. Very, very nice. And of course, Trickster gives you even more charges and damage over time, making him the perfect ascendancy for a build like this, honestly. As for defenses, right, we have around 4k life. We have Mind Over Matter with around 2,000 mana. And when you do the magic formula, 4,147 times 0.43, that means that you need roughly 1,800 mana, so that way you die before you run out of mana. Because if you do it the other way and you don't have enough mana, you'll run out of mana before you die, and then you feel shameless, walking naked, not being able to cast a single spell like a chicken. Don't do that. Make sure you have enough mana so that you die before you run out of mana. And then on top of that, we do have a Corrupted Soul over here using a Glorious Vanity. It corrupts all the nodes here, so they turn them kind of useless, right? Unless you get like really lucky with like ES over there and, mana regen, things like that. This will make 20% of your maximum life as extra ES, giving us another 1,600 energy shield, which is really nice because a lot of these nodes are ES for mana. So it's kind of like another Mind Over Matter. So our effective HP, I would say, with chaos damage being like around 6,000 to 6,500, but the actual number is roughly around 7k, maybe a bit more. But things can happen. Your ES is not always up. You can't always recharge it. So the only way you can rely on that is Cinder Swallow to cover it for you, or just back away. So that's why in my opinion, my life is around 6k. Right, so be it. For damage purposes, we have Elemental Equilibrium to lower the res even further, and Elemental Overload. Now, as for people who want to know how expensive certain gear types are, the most expensive by far and required unique, unfortunately, is the Pharaoh's Fur. Reason being is because it gives you maximum frenzy charges and power charges whenever you get cat stuff. So you see 3, 2, 1, and then see the power charge of the frenzy charges have reset their times. So this is the only way you can sustain discharges, all 3 charges by itself, and then you combine that with a Vol's Devotion, so when we cast, those power charges go away, then we get Endurance Charge from Vol's Devotion, and then they come back the minute you get cat stuff again, and now I have all the charges. The other way to do this for a boss is to go up to them and Endure and Cry. You get 4 to 5 charges due to the amount of power you get from a unique boss, and I'll give you, your endurance charges for a boss fight. So that's why Pharaoh's Fur is amazing, and on top of that, it makes your Aspect of the Cat reserve no mana. And the reason why this is important, because we're linking Aspect of the Cat that's on our helmet, I'll explain all this stuff in the gear section, with Swift Affliction and less duration to make the duration even smaller. So it just, every 3 seconds we get it, or every 6, because it's 2 buffs. So every 6 seconds we get our things back, And, you know, the reason to sustain this even further, what you want to do, and I highly recommend it, you need Swift's Killer. Because what ends up happening is you have 15% chance to get a frenzy charge and a power charge on kill. So that means that when we shoot our first, our first big one, we have endurance charges, and that one discharge, depending on enemies you kill, will give you charges back. Let's say if you didn't have any from your stealth, which means you can keep going and then keep going and then keep going. So despite the 6-second cooldown, you're still fine, right? And the only other way I can figure this out is if you use a blue dream, but blue dream requires like a lot of res. So if you have a blue dream socketed here, right, it'll turn the 18 cold and lightning to like a 36% chance to get a power charge. It helped amazingly when I was Archmage, but no longer can we go here, and it didn't make any sense anywhere else. But that's very important to sustain. If you don't have this node, it's going to be very hard for you to sustain by itself. So that plus the Pharaoh's Fur and the Vol's Devotion, and you're good to go. Right. So other than that, the Pharaoh's Fur, the Vol's Devotion, which is required, has gone down in price. Look for around 40 Chaos and Exalt. Everything else is basically dirt cheap, even the gloves. As for the Eventuality Rod, which is not really required, but absolutely amazing for the build because it gives you power charges and endurance charges, you can get an eye level 84 one, right, with that for around 8 to 10 Chaos. Now, you don't need a 6-link. I just bought one because I wanted a +2 staff, but then I figured I actually prefer having a trigger staff and putting the spell on my chest piece, because then you can't have a trigger staff if your spell's in there, because you can't cast a spell then. And here we have Overstorm, Stormbrand to cast Elemental Overload with increased crit and Elemental Equilibrium. We have Conviction to lower the res minus 25. And yes, I know that it does fire damage, but it gets overridden by Stormbrand instantaneously. Don't worry about that. Added fire because the gloves convert 50% of our physical damage to cold, meaning that Wave of Conviction now deals mostly cold, which makes it reduce the cold res. We don't want that. We link add fire, and now it does only fire. And then put as a 5-link, and the last link you want is Elemental Weakness. That way you have, Elemental Weakness, Overstorms, and that. Now, I casted Winter Orb like an idiot by mistake, or Void Sphere, excuse me. The reason why Void Sphere is so good is because when you have a basically a ignite proliferation, the ground's going to be like kind of like ignited, and the minute an enemy walks into it, they'll just melt instantaneously. Well, using this, they get sucked into the area and they melt. This is really good for heisting, because that means during a door, you can suck them in from the door and they just melt. It's really, really cool. That's pretty much the gist of the build guide. Let's go into a quick map. So now the map has been sexented. Of course, we are Awakeners of Weight. Let's rock and roll. You guys can see how crazy this build is. I'll even put some bloodlines in there. I do have immunity to bleed and curses, so we should be fine, hopefully, and not get absolutely destroyed. So we do have Arcane Cloak on a walk, because it does add lightning damage to our big discharge. It procs Element or Arcane Surge just for the mana region, because the spell damage does nothing for Ignite. And on top of that, it just gives us defense. So quite nice. Highly recommend it. And it didn't even load. Thanks, game. It didn't even load. You guys can see, you see how crazy that thing is. So what ends up happening is, let's say we discharge, right? I can just suck everybody in, and they get sucked into that area, and they start melting. So it's really good for, things like ice. So leave that, and you see they start spawning, they'll instantly just melt, because it's just ignite proliferation.
Just need a moment to
That's why it's so freaking good. I don't know. Now, I know ignite proliferation is also a cluster jewel. Let me lower the volume is. I know that it's a cluster jewel, but the damage on the gem itself is actually large enough to be one of our main damage sources. So I think the cluster jewel minus max fire res is more important than the Fan the Flames cluster jewel, if you guys are curious about that. So yeah, we are kind of like shattering because we do have frenzy charges, but it's kind of weird, to be honest. Oh, look at that. And suck him in. Ooh, even more speed. So this build is an absolute freaking joy to play with, dude. Like, I have so much fun playing this. With elusive and everything, our Quicksilver Flask, our dash, charges up. Why not? It's just absolutely amazing. Oh, here we got Legion. Let's pop this real quick. All right, so charge up real quick. Get everything going. Winter Orb actually sucks him in. You guys see here. Pop. Baby, I love this build. It's so freaking satisfying. I did not intend to get a Quicksilver Shrine, so if it looks better than usual, I apologize. It was not intentional. All right. That was a bad one. There we go. There you go. Look at everything melt. Rares melt, everything melts. Essence, don't even question it. Obviously, they're gonna melt. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. I'm feeling myself. Bosses, goodbye. Walk away. Blow your load and walk away. That's all you gotta do. You're dead. Ignite is such a nice thing because now, you know, our defense is basically our movements, our stable ability, I guess. Where we don't have to stand still in front of the boss to do damage. We can just, you know, oh, we got an S here. Or whatever your name is, and you're dead. Goodbye. So, yeah, I mean, I say, dude, honestly, for the chest piece, you can use it at a 5 link, and that's the bulk of the build. That's it. The staff is very cheap. I'll explain how to craft it in a bit in the build section. And yeah, boys, that's the map. Yeah, I mean, it was boosted because of the Quicksilver, but that's the map. Okay, now very quickly, I want to go over a little bit about the leveling process before we get into the actual skill tree, because it makes a very big deal early on. Now, when I first leveled this character, it was actually quite of a hassle because I was building as an Archmage character, and I was not using a cold ignite. Basically, I wasn't using Himburns to ignite my cold damage. Meaning that Stormfire, which allows my, you know, lightning damage to ignite, is only available at level 80. And that was a big issue because that means I couldn't play the build until level 80. Because I was basically an Archmage only lightning, you know, ignite build. And sure, my fire damage did ignite, but then that would require you to spam your Enduring Cry, like you see here, over and over again so you can cast your Discharge. Because the Enduring Cry will give you your charges. Because until then, until you get your Pharaoh's Fur, you're not really getting any charges whatsoever for you to proc your Discharge. So for this very reason, early on, what you really want to do is actually use Freezing Pulse. Now, Freezing Pulse you get at level 1 in Act 1, and it's basically the one of the first ones you can pick up. However, keep in mind that for cold damage to ignite, you need to use Himburn Gloves and use the Fire and Ice Prophecy. The Fire and Ice Prophecy upgrades the Him Sorrow Gloves, which are basically identical to these, and just adds the modifier cold damage can ignite. Now, these gloves are available, as you guys see here, is like a Corrupted 1 base at level 24. So level 20 until level 24, you're not going to be able to ignite with your Freezing Pulse. So you kind of have to build like a generic spellcaster, you know, using axioms, using your life sprigs, getting generic spell damage, right? Once you're at level 24, then you can start thinking about how do I make the cold damage ignite. Around this time, you know, so the first thing you want to do is really just use Freezing Pulse, use added cold, use increased critical strike gems, you know, use basically added lightning if you want, use Arcane Surge, use Controlled Destruction. You can even use Elemental Focus if you so desire. But at that point, which is around Act 2, you can use your Him Sorrow Gloves. Now, when you switch to Ignite, what you really want to be using is Freezing Pulse. At that point, you want to link Combustion to it. You're really like, why do you want fire damage? The Ignite, even if it's based off cold damage, like I said earlier, it's still fire damage. And the reason why it's so important, because the gem itself gives you a chance to Ignite. That's what you really want this for, right? You have Elemental Proliferation in Act 1 as well. Allows your Ignites to spread, so you get a lot more clear potential. And then you have Unbound Elements, because Ignite is an element, very nice. And then Enduring Cry, you want to level up just because you're going to be able to be using it anyway later on. And it's just good for endurance charges, so might as well. Right, in Act 3, you get burning damage, right? And at this point, you do have your Discharge available around level 28, which is also Act 3. It's kind of earlier than Act 3, but it's around Act 3. Unfortunately, there's nothing in Act 2 for you. And Act 2 is basically you're still using spell damage, and then you're swapping to Ignite. So that's kind of where you're kind of fumbling over a little bit. And at this point, you could use Discharge. However, I don't recommend it because, again, it's not going to be good until you get your Pharaoh's Fur. Because without the, you know, aspect itself switching over, giving you those charges, it doesn't feel good. And especially without the Trickster Ascendancy, which I'll go over now, it doesn't feel good. Right? So I say recommend to just stick with Freezing Pulse. So you have burning damage available in Act 3. And then as well, you have Ignite Proliferation, which where you swap out Elemental Proliferation, because it's the same thing, just gives you more damage. Right? In Act 4. And that's what you're going to be using. Another thing you can use in around Act 4 or Act 3 is Inspiration. Inspiration is quite nice because it does give you more elemental damage. And all you ever do is just cast over and over again. This doesn't make sense for Discharge because you can't spam it. But it's really good for, you know, your Freezing Pulse because you have a decent amount of cast speed. So if you want to use that as well, up to you, whichever one you get first. But these are the generic skill gems. By the end game, of course, you want to be using basically Discharge, Unbound Elements, Combustion, Second Wind if you're using Discharge. Otherwise, just put something else in there. If you're using Freezing Pulse still, Ignite Proliferation, and Burning Damage. I say if you're using Freezing Pulse still, just use Inspiration here instead of Second Wind. And that's basically your go-to. And with that out of the way, let's go over the skill tree very quickly. This program is called Path of Building. The link is down below. This is a community fork version. It's a different version, and it helps you, you know, basically get more information, more detailed information, how accurate your DPS is So with that note, on the bottom left here, we have managed trees. Allows you to see different trees for the same build. And early games around level 35, you guys can see how the build starts off with. You know, we are a trickster. You can choose to go the elemental damage route if you want, but it's not as efficient. So, you know, early on, go for it. But remember that towards, you know, mid-game to end game, you really want to just spend the regrets out of it and then go to the right side. That's what you want to do. It saves you more points and it's more worthwhile. But it's up to you. If you want the damage early on, go ahead and go through here. Basically, we have trigger for more damage. We have life, mana regen damage, life, a lot of life here. And then up here, we Arcane Will for more mana regen because it gives you flat 3 mana regen. It's quite nice. More life and mana, more life. And we're basically rushing for elemental overload, right? This is what you want to be doing. Now, you can go for Arcanist Dominion and things like this, maybe Annihilation. I wouldn't recommend that, but there's a little bit of spell damage here. If you want to just focus a bit more on the Freezing Pulse, if it doesn't feel too good, or maybe if you don't have a Tabula to help you to get a lot of damage for links. Right, so Elemental Overload is basically your 1-2. You want to go for that as quick as possible. So in Act 1, try to pick up an Orb of Storms, link Elemental, not Elemental, link Increased Critical Strike Gem to it. So it has a higher chance to crit, thus proccing Elemental Overload for you. Very, very nice. We come down here, we have Quick Recovery, and this is where it kind of changes. You see we have Elemental Equilibrium, and then you go up, we have Fire damage. Around this time is when you want to use Burn Gloves. Elemental Equilibrium means that when your cold damage hits, since it's cold, they have additional cold res, but they have negative 50 fire res, which makes the cold damage from your Freezing Pulse do a lot more ignite damage. So this is really cool with Freezing Pulse. I highly recommend it once you start igniting. And then fire damage scales the ignite, so don't pick this up or Elemental Equilibrium until you are ignite. Moving on, and then we have Purity of Flesh for more life. That is generically it. Pretty much it. The only thing you need to worry about is these two things. Do not pick them up until you ignite. Moving on to your mid-game tree. Right? Boom, bada bing. This is where basically it's around, it says right here, around level 70-ish. And around here, you're kind of just swapping to your Pharaoh's Fur and everything, and your Discharge at this point. Around here, we start picking up more things like damage over time because we're fully ignite at this point. We have Elusive because Elusive gives you like 30-40% movement speed, 30% to be exact actually, it says right there. And it's amazing for just clear speed. Up to you if you want to drop it and, you know, focus on life at the beginning, but if you want the speed and you're in softcore, go ahead and pick it up. You know, we start getting our charges, your power charges, you know, more life here, our endurance charges, frenzy charges here. We have jewels. You can pick them up later if you want towards like end game, so you can drop that if you want until later. Not that very important. You want to pick up a Glorious Vanity with Doriani. That's all you got to do. These jewels tend to be expensive when they have Doriani on them. It's basically the type of node that you get. So basically the name dictates what type of big node or the keystone you're going to get. You know, Corrupted Souls for Doriani's, and I think some other ones I don't really know them by memory because time is just kind of iffy for me. You get a different node. So the one you want is Doriani. I know Akoya's, I think, is the other one, is kind of cheaper. What you can do is buy an Akoya's for around 30 to 40C and then divine it and hope to God to get a Doriani's. It's a bit of a gamble. I did it and I hit it on one shot and I got lucky. The other nodes that are around it do not matter as they literally turn into whatever the damn jewel desires. So yes, this is random. You cannot change this. So if you go into my tree real quick, all these nodes instead of being life now gives you like aura effect, spell damage, lightning damage, dodge. It's just random, so you don't pick those nodes up any longer as much as I would like that life, unfortunately. Right, but what's good about Corrupted Soul when you use Doriani's, you know, Glorious Vanity Timeless Jewel is that it gives you 20% of your maximum life as extra. Yes, that's giving me, you see here, an extra 1,600 energy shield. That's kind of like a mini Mind Over Matter, where 50% of the non-chaos damage, so like Fizz and Elemental, does bypass it, but it does help out kind of like Mind Over Matter, take a portion of the damage for you. I don't like relying it too much, but it does help out a ton. So if you can pick it up, I highly recommend it for defense. Right? Otherwise, we have here, now we have a Thread of Hope. This Thread of Hope is amazing. You get Breath of Flames for more damage. We get Snow Forge for even more damage and res. And we can pick up Practical Application for that strength and dexterity if you really need it. I think I needed it as well. Let me check my tree. Just to recall, I did pick it up. And it helps a lot with just gearing, and I highly recommend it. And Lightning Walker, because yes, even though Ignite is fire damage, because the Ignite is based off all three elements, any of these elements you see here does affect the Ignite, which is kind of cool. But for 1 point, it's pretty good. And then we have Light Eater. This one's kind of up to the air. It helps me recover my energy shield back because we're still doing spell damage with Discharge. And with that many charges, it still does a good chunk of damage. So it helps regen all that energy shield back and it gives you a bit of damage. Right? You have a Jewel Socket there. And at this point, you want Mind Over Matter. Mind Over Matter is really good once you start hitting, you know, around 1,500 to 2,000 mana. And this helps with the defense. It's giving us around 67,000 effective HP, which is very, very nice. I do feel quite tanky despite having very little defense in terms of armor and things like that. Right? Over here, beautiful intuitive leap, we can get this overcharge, power charge, we get the life, we get the endurance charge, right? And if you want, you can pick up the other life notes, up to you. And you can also pick up Faith and Steel if you want that res, if you need it, you know, nothing big deal. And then Divine Judgment for that extra juicy 50% elemental damage. Do not pick up the penetration because Ignite does not penetrate. Keep that in mind. And then really at the end game is just the Cluster Jewel. This Cluster Jewel is actually super massive. You really want a fire damage Cluster Jewel, right? And it doesn't really matter what you want, but the main one you really want is Burning Bright. And then I went Disorientating Display just to get blind because as a Trickster, we do have a little bit of evasion. So, you know, I think it's worthwhile. 50% chance, I mean, not 50% chance, 10% blind. A blind is literally 50% evasion, just like that, if it procs. So I highly recommend it if you can pick it up. But you can go for AOE or res, whatever you need. Now, the medium Cluster Jewels, there's really only 2 or 3 that you really want. One you always want. You always want Cook the Life. Cook the Life is basically like penetration for Ignite because it's a debuff. No matter, you can stack as many of these as you want. When they're ignited, they have -10 res, which does affect the Ignite. So it's actually amazing for this. That's why I have 2 of them. So try to get a medium jewel with at least that in it. And then the other one, try to get a blowback. You can get 2 of these. They make your Ignite DPS faster, but the Ignite's over its duration is, you know, not as much damage. But it's very, very nice for just deeps. And I highly recommend it, basically. You don't have a lot of sources of deal damage faster, so it's a good way to get them. Most people get 2 of them, but I was happy because I crafted this one myself. I paid 40 chaos for this one. This one I just crafted with a fossil jewel, and I got 10% damage over time multiplier and chaos resistance. I said, okay with me. I went with it. That's all it is. And then 2 more jewels. Now these jewels, all the generic jewels, are literally just damage over time or burning damage with life. These jewels are actually dirt cheap because you can get some random like lightning damage or cold, and they sell for so dirt cheap that you might as well just buy them. I kid you not. I spent like less than like 20 chaos on every jewel. That's rare. Anyway, the unique jewels are a bit expensive, like the intuitive leap and the timeless jewel. That's basically the gist of the tree. Nothing too complicated. As for the ascendancy, you know, we're basically picking up with the arcane early on, just so you know you have attack speed, which is very nice for clearing things like that, right? And at this point, you want to pick up Patient Reaper just for the damage over time and recovery. Then I say Swift Killer. By this point, you're probably using Discharge because that's already like Merc Lab. It's level 68, and then you have Uber Lab at level 75 where you pick up the more damage. This is not that important. It's just damage. You know, it doesn't make or break the build. Swift Killer, you really need that chance to get a power charge and frenzy charge on kill when you're using Discharge to make it feel good. So without this, you're not gonna like it. So I highly recommend you pick this up as your 3rd ascendancy or even your 2nd one, depending how earlier you're using Discharge. But I highly recommend it as your 3rd choice. And then 4th, Prolonged Pain. That's pretty much it for the tree. Okay, now with the build summary out of the way and the skill tree out of the way, what we're gonna go over is the detailed information on the equipment we're using for the build to function the way that it does. Now, the staff that we're using is called an Eventuality Rod, and it's a unique base type to the Heist League. I am not sure how GGG is going to implement this base types, there's a bunch of them, into the core game. Just keep in mind that it only belongs to the Heist League. We will see how GG handles this in the future. But essentially, this is amazing because it gives you an additional power charge and an endurance charge, which is absolutely insane for a discharge build. Now, what you really want to do with this is just buy a normal one. They're dirt cheap. And you want, ideally, eye level 84, so you get the highest amount of, you know, tier of modifiers. You want to alt spam it as a magic base until you get fire damage over time multiplier, which is ideal because it's your highest damage type or damage modifier. And you either want burning damage or fire damage, right? Now, in my scenario, I got burning damage. And what you want to do at this point is you need a minimum of 2 suffixes in order to multi-mod it. So in this case, if you got burning damage, you want to regal a prefix. Doesn't matter if it's good or bad. If it's good, good for you. If it's bad, whatever. Who cares? We don't need it. But if you have fire damage, right, you want to regal a suffix. Keep that in mind. That way you have at least 2 open suffixes available for you. Now, what this means for us is when you multi-mod it, it's a suffix. That's why you can see can have up to 3 crafted modifiers. It's a suffix modifier. It takes up a slot. And then you want to craft trigger. It's really good because it allows you to automate any spell that you have on your staff when you cast another spell. They have their own individual cooldowns, about 4 seconds. So when one goes on cooldown, I'll proc the next one. And then the next one and the next one's really good for proccing a lot of spells that are utility for a build like this. We're talking like Overstorms, Stormbrand, I'll go right down the links, and things like that to proc your elemental overload. You can even do Wave of Conviction or proc minus resistances on the boss. It's absolutely amazing. And as a prefix, I crafted fire damage. Goes on a 200 weapon. You get up to 80% fire damage. It's very, very nice. These are actually very cheap to craft. The only real expense is the 2 exalt modifier, you know, to like basically multi-mod it. But of course, if you don't have 2 exalts, all this is really doing for me is giving me an extra 80% fire damage. You can just craft trigger on the staff, and that is it. You don't really need the multi-mod, if you get what I'm saying here, right? Because if we lose the multi-mod, all we're losing is the fire damage. That's all it is. It's just min-maxing, right? So all you really need is a trigger staff. With that information out of the way, I hope you guys understood that. Here we have over storms, storm brand, right, linked with increased crit strikes and also wave of conviction. That way they have a higher chance of critting, thus proccing elemental overload, excuse me for that, and giving you 40% more damage. And we do have added fire only for the wave of conviction, and that only affects physical spells. And yes, I know, kind of mess up my elemental equilibrium, making them take less fire damage because they have additional fire res, but it only hits once. And then the Stormbrand and Overstorms, which only deal lightning damage and I believe cold because of the gloves, give you a little bit of cold damage, has no fire app whatsoever. We'll just override it instantaneously, so don't worry about that. And what this means is that now that Wave of Conviction does do majority fire damage, it will lower the res by minus 25 fire. You have to put an added fire here because once you use these gloves, the Wave of Conviction will do majority cold, which will make it reduce cold damage, which doesn't, or cold res, which doesn't do anything for the build. As you guys can see here, I can dash, I can cast over my, Scorching Ray. We'll get into that now. Anything I want, it'll proc these spells, and they're constantly on the floor, and it makes the build feel automated and super, super smooth. I highly recommend it over, let's say, somebody in the comments would probably say, why not craft a +2 or +3 staff? I didn't need the damage, and I prefer having an automated style instead. That's up to you. Moving on to your helmet. Actually, before we go into the helmet, I want to go over the chest piece because the chest piece is a very core mechanic of the build. Pharaoh's Fur. Basically, the majority or the most important thing about this is that Aspect of the Cat reserves no mana, and especially you gain up to your maximum frenzy charges and power charges when you gain Cat Stealth. You see this little thing up here? You have a Cat's Agility and Cat Stealth. Don't worry about what they do. The one gives you cast speed, the other one gives you crit chance and void damage. That's all it is. I'm not really focusing on that. It's just a nice plus. And they did change so often that you can't rely on it. Now, these things usually last 8 to 9 seconds, or maybe even 10. But what you can do is you can socket an item that has Aspect of the Cat in it with 2 support gems, one being Swift Affliction and Less Duration. Less Duration being the more important one. This reduces the duration of the buffs so they switch faster, thus giving your frenzies and power charges faster. You get my point here? So you have to craft it on either your boots or your helmet. Your gloves are unique, so you can't do that. It can be a ring, it can be an amulet, because you need to socket gems into it. Specifically these 2. I'm not confusing anybody here. I know it's a little bit complicated, but trust me, it's actually very simple. In order to craft Aspect of the Cat, you need a suffix on the item, and at that point, it's very easy. Just buy Feral First of the Plains in the market. I'll put the link down below in the description. It's just a beast. You go to your menagerie, you right-click it, it adds it to your collection, and now in your recipes, you have the option of crafting aspects of the cats on an item. And in this case, since boots tend to be quite expensive, I did it on a helmet. Very easy. As for the helmet chance, it's just not required. It's just AOE, guys. If you guys want to do it for the memes, go for it. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. And they're pretty dirt cheap. I bought this for about 30 chaos without anything on it. And then at that point, I just crafted it with Essences of Greed to give you, guaranteed life on it. And until I had an open suffix, I just scoured essence. And when I had an open suffix, I craft Aspect of the Cat, and that was it. Simple as that. I just got some, life, res, and the cat. That's it. So don't try to overcomplicate it. It's very easy to craft, guys. And then again, the Scorching Ray that you guys saw earlier was linked with Infused Channeling as a 2 link. And Infused Channeling gives you 10% more damage to the type of tag that the channeled skill has. Since Scorching Ray has fire damage, this will give you 10% more fire damage, which does affect Ignite, which is very nice. And it lasts around 9 seconds. I highly recommend it. Right, so that's our links there. Now back to the chest piece. The links we're going to be using is Discharge. I'm pretty sure I said it so many times already, but you say is no. Unbound Elements, Combustion, Second Wind, Ignite Proliferation, and Burning Damage. This is going to be using for clear. For single target, you want to be using, where is it? Deadly Elements instead of Second Wind. And that'll be your single target, and that's the beauty about having an Ignite build. You don't have to, double tap. I can just go to a boss, do one big Ignite, and then just run away. Very, very nice. Right, so make sure about that. And moving on to your gloves, very important. You want to be using Hrim Sorrow gloves, so your frenzy charges, which do cold damage, can ignite. And they're available level 24. You need to use or buy Hrim Sorrow gloves, which are available super early on. and you want to buy the Fire and Ice Prophecy, all you have to do is literally in Act 1, go to the little island, Tidal Island, and kill Elric. It's like one of the first bosses you kill for a mission, and it upgrades the gloves to him burns. Now, if you guys want to know, the corruption that you ideally want is Elemental Weakness on hit or Frenzy Charge ideally. I corrupted around 25 of them. I bought 36 in total, but I only corrupted 25. And in those 25 or 26, I got 2 Elemental Weakness on hit and 1 Frenzy Charges if you're curious about the rates. I could have gotten lucky. Who knows? I think I did. Here we just have Second Wind, Enduring Cry, Dash, and Void Sphere, so I can proc each of them twice, you know? I can proc all of them twice. And it's quite nice for the cooldown. And Enduring Cry is a source of endurance charges during a boss fight, so you don't have to deal with the whole mechanic about the Vol's Devotion, which we'll go over right now. The Vol's Devotion is another core mechanic. I know I'm jumping here, but I kind of want to go over the important stuff first. The Vol's Devotion allows that when you have your power charges and you expend them, you get an equal amount of endurance charges. In this case, I can only have 5, so it gives me 5, and that allows you to basically sustain on a map. You know, you have endurance charges, you kill stuff, the Trickster Ascendancy procs giving you frenzies and power charges, you proc again, and the cycle continues until you basically just, for whatever reason, get unlucky. And if you do, you have Enduring Cry to get endurance charges back. Or you just wait the cooldown for the Ass of the Cat to give you the rest of the charges back. It's super nice, very, very good. You want to use it in the build, trust me. If not, it's going to feel really, really bad. Now, that out of the way, the other important item is Stormfire. Stormfire, all it does is makes your lightning damage ignite. That's it. Everything else is kind of whatever. Mana regen is kind of cool. Res is kind of cool. The damage for every time that I shock an enemies, kind of cool, but not important. So that's all it is. Very cheap. That's what I recommend. Right, the other ring is an Essence Worm, and this allows your Malevolence, which is basically a damage over time aura, be free, and that allows you to have all your mana from Mind Over Matter. Basically simple as that. Another cheap item. Right, moving on. Your belt is going to be life and resistances. You can put like cooldown reduction, but honestly, it doesn't matter. I blow up anything anyway. I never feel like I have enough charges with the cooldown of discharge. I feel like I'm running out of charges first, and if I'm off cooldown on discharge. It's just the way it is. I don't recommend it. Just focus on life and res. That's all you want. If you get elemental damage from a fossil, like a prismatic fossil, go for it as well. If you have the damage, or I mean the money. Right. As for your abyssal jewels, damage over time while you're wielding to end a weapon, and life. And then I just had strength and dexterity because all I needed. And then for your boots, obviously, res, movement speed ideally 30%, and life. And then I needed dexterity, so I went with that, and I got some dex. Do I need dexterity? I absolutely need dexterity and rip my entire build. Excuse me while I try to put this back on real quick. All right, we're back. My boots have been fixed. I apologize for that. I just wanted to make sure that I really needed dexterity. And at this point, you want increased duration with Arcane Surge, Arcane Cloak, and we have Second Wind. This is kind of unique for the build. Arcane Surge doesn't do anything for the build because spell damage does not affect ignites. Keep that in mind. But it does give me mana regen. And since it's a Mind Over Matter build, it is very useful in order to sustain my mana. So I do it anyway. And the reason for that, because we do have an Arcane Cloak. Because Arcane Cloak, even if you're not an Archmage, it does sacrifice a portion of your mana and give that portion as a, shield. It does give me around, let me do this real quick. 1,200 life as armor, right? And it gives a portion of that as lightning damage, and that adds to the base damage using Stormfire of your ignite. So it's really good for damage as well. So it's a really good defense offensive. I highly recommend it. And Second Wind just to lower the cooldown. That's basically the gist of the build and its links. Hope you guys have any questions. Please let me know. I know it can kind of get complicated, right? For your flask, you want a Quicksilver with movement speed of Adrenaline, right? With ideally reduced charges or additional charges. You have a Life Flask with immunity to bleed. Highly recommend that. Sinner Swallow with crit chance. The crit chance is actually not that needed. So if you don't want to overpay like the 3 or 4 exalts for a crit chance one, then be my guess you don't have to. I think we have plenty of crit by ourselves of the increased crit. And the power charge is that if you look here, our Stormbrand has a 45% to 53% chance to crit depending on the cat's buff. So you don't really need the crit chance, as it does nothing for the build other than proc elemental overload. So here, feel free to put movement speed and buy a cheaper one. Up to you. I just have this one already. Might as well use it. For your Sulfur Flask, this is nice for extra regen for your mana and life, and it'll give you more increased damage, which affects the ignite anyway, right? And this has immunity to curses, is basically what you want. And then a mana pot just for your, of course, Mind Over Matter. And here you want to make sure it's enduring, because the problem if you don't use enduring is that if you're full mana and you proc a mana pot, it doesn't have an effect. So for example, I have immunity to freeze on my mana pot. Now let's say I'm frozen, but my mana's full. Just say, you know, I got hit with something like Uber Elder, am I getting really hit, but I'm frozen. Then this will not remove anything because the mana pot's not actually in effect. It's full. It doesn't work. But if you use an enduring mana pot, even if you're full mana, the mana pot's still going. It's still regenning, like in the background, right? It's kind of hard to explain, but that's the way it functions. You guys see here, I still keep my immunity. You see there. So the whole point of the enduring mana pot is that you keep the immunity effect even if your mana pool is full. That's how you want to do. So you want an enduring mana pot of 8 or, you know, just get immunity to freeze. But in total, you want immunity to bleed, curses, and freeze on whatever order. I highly recommend the bleed one to stick on the life flask, ideally. Right? And as for your anointment, basically you want to anoint a frenzy charge down here. As you know, you could have anointed an endurance charge, but frenzy charges are always guaranteed to come back because of your Pharaoh's Fur, not like endurance charges. So I highly recommend that one over the endurance charge. Right? As for your Pantheon, you want to get Soul of Brine King just for immunity to stuns. You really don't get stunned that often, but it's quite nice. And then Soul Shikari for just chaos damage, because why not? You can put whatever you want, honestly. These things didn't really matter. Except for this one. Try to keep that one. But the Shikari, you can pick something else if you so desire. Right? And for your Bandit choice, you can see in the POB up on the top left. We decide to kill all of them and get the 2 passive points instead, since we're not really crit. So we don't need the crit multi. That's basically the gist of that. And with that, guys, that pretty much wraps up the entire build guide. Now, yes, this build was made in 3.12 heist, but the video has been completed now right before 3.13 ritual because delays. That's all you got to know, right? Delays. But either way, I hope you guys enjoyed. The build does not get any significant changes. If anything, it seemed like I got a bit of a buff, even though TRICKSTER got nerfed. I don't know what's happening. POB win numbers went up. I don't know why, but that's the gist of everything. If you guys have any questions, please let me know in the Discord or in the comments down below. And I hope you have a wonderful 3.13 ritual experience because we're all very excited and this league looks absolutely amazing. And boy, we got Harvest back, bro. That's all I care about. Peace.